very real sense, this is also the new year for the United Nations too. In the spirit of Tashlich, I hope we can cast away the distrust and disagreement of the past year. And as we look ahead, I encourage member states and all our partners to work together for the common good and a better world for all. Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone to a new webinar, this time hosted by the Forum for Cultural Diplomacy. My name is Thomas Sandell. I'm the co-founder together with Gregory Lafitte, who is today in Basel. And today we are very fortunate to be joined by the Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism, Ambassador Felix Klein. You are warmly welcome. Let me say a few words about the format. This is a new concept. We call it a conversation. So it's not a regular interview. There's nothing that we have rehearsed together, but a friendly conversation. And it brings me back to one of the last times we met in Berlin. You kindly invited us out to lunch, and we had a very interesting and lively discussions, and a lot of the things you said later, had a strong impact on the work that has developed. One thing in particular which you said at the time was, what would Germany be without its Jews? And you mentioned as a good example, well, how many Nobel Prize winners would there be if it weren't for our Jewish population? Perhaps we can start on that note, revisiting this question today, where you've been already for quite a number of years working on this portfolio. Ambassador Klein, what would Germany be without its Jewish population?
Germany without a Jewish population would be much, much poorer culturally, but also regarding, well, the whole diversity. You mentioned the situation in 1933 was that 1/3 of all the Nobel Prize winners were Germans, and one of these 1/3 out of one of these 1/3 were Jewish Nobel Prize winners. So of course they had a tremendous influence in scientific world, but also other sections. If you think of culture, of course, of their economic contributions, they did founding factories, or even well, in all sectors, lawyers, doctors, for instance, in the 1940s, for instance, when Jews were expelled or killed, there was a big shortage of doctors in Berlin. 40% of, for instance, of Berlin doctors were Jewish doctors. So of course there was a big gap here. And so the country suffered tremendously and harmed itself in a tremendous way by throwing Jews out or deporting them and killing them. So it was an absolute absurd self-harming situation. And now, of course, we are very happy that we have Jewish life blossoming again. It's a miracle, actually, that we have German Jews and Jewish life in Germany. In 1945, the very famous Rabbi Leo Beck, after his liberation in the concentration camp in Terezin near Prague, said 1,500 years of Jewish life in Germany, that's over. Germany will never be a place for Jews again to live. And if Leo Beck saw the reality of Germany in 2020, he would be, I think, very pleased that he was wrong in his prediction. So we have about 100,000 Jews being registered in their communities here in Germany, and another estimated 100,000 Jews living here, many of them in Israel, and they contribute once again to the cultural diversity, to many sectors. They found startups, or they have creative things. So for Germany, I can definitely say it's good for a country to have Jews and to allow Jews to settle, to do everything. And the immigration program we started in the 1990s for Jews from the countries, basically from the former Soviet Union, is a story of success. It's around 30 years now that this program is effective. So the first generation is already there. It's an incredible development we've seen. And of course, the Jewish communities here in Germany have contributed very much to that history of success, that in integration of Jews settling here again was really great, and it was a fantastic work, because if you think of, for instance, a Jewish community like the one in Augsburg in the south of Germany, we had around 200 people in that Jewish community, and they had to integrate 1,000 people coming from Russia and the Ukraine. And they succeeded. And this is really a fantastic work. And I think in the current discussion of how to integrate refugees, also from other countries, we could learn from that.
Yes, yes. Yes, actually, it makes me think of this this phrase I heard the other day by Georges Arthur Goldschmidt, the German French writer and translator, who he wasn't sure if it was him who made up this saying, or if it's something more known, or if someone famous said it before him. But he was saying that Germans and Jews go together. He was saying that Germans are pagan Jews, and Jews are monotheistic Germans, and monotheistic Germans. And I read quite a number of writings by Jürgen Habermas, who's basically saying exactly what you just said, and how important the Jewish community and Jewish individuals came back, returned to Germany, and helped Germany become one nation again, and resurrect from the World War II. And he, of course, he was very much linked to Gershom Scholem, and I find it fascinating to read how he saw the influence of Jewish culture, but Jewish individuals who came back, like Gershom Scholem, who was born in Berlin, who went to live in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University, but who finally decided to come back and have an influence in a way on Germany. That's I believe a fascinating story.
What could we say, looking historically, where, Ambassador Klein, the first Jews who came to what is today Germany, what do we know? I'm told a story, I don't know if it's true, that the first Jews that came were invited into, that was the Rhine Valley at the time, from Italy, from the Roman Empire, quote unquote, to bring civilization, because the feudal princes at the time knew that these were very able people that could read and write and had a rich intellectual tradition. Is this something, has it any validity, or what is known about the first Jewish settlements in Germany?
Yes, actually, this is true. The first Jews came together with the Romans to what is known today as Germany. There's a very famous edict, they call it. So it's a law being passed by Emperor Constantine in the year 321, and that's the first source we have about that proves the existence of Jewish life in what is now Germany. And it gives that law gives the right to Jews to set up a community in Cologne and to settle in the Rhine Valley. We have very old Jewish communities there, also in Trier and in Worms. And of course, Jewish life must have existed even before 321, obviously. But we take that law of Emperor Constantine now as a very good reason or basis for a big initiative we start next year. We will celebrate 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany, and we would like to make clear once again how strongly Jewish groups contributed to the cultural development to Germany. Of course, we do not want to exclude also the bitter, the terrible parts of German Jewish history that culminated into the Holocaust. But of course, Jewish life is so much more than the Shoah. We would also like to make clear the very a strong impact they had into our German culture. So we would also like to make clear to the German public that Jewish culture is an inherent part of our own culture, and sometimes it is hidden. Mm-hmm. People do not know very much about it, but this we would like to change. And as you said, it's they brought civilization, and it was a very, very good influence we had in Germany.
It brings me back to the last century, and when I was in Poland a few years ago, and of course the loss of Jewish life in Poland is perhaps the most disastrous of any. And there was an interesting trend where Jews had been living for hundreds and hundreds of years, and there was such a loss, such a void in society, so that even there was no Jewish life there at the moment, they started to have Jewish festivals, because it was something in their soul sort of felt that it wasn't right without this component. I read an article recently about Berlin in the 1920s. And it said that when you think about fashion today, you think about Paris, Milano, and maybe some other capitals. You don't think about Germany, with all due respect, necessarily. But at the time, Berlin was, in some respect, a very creative capital, also in design and fashion. And like, say, similar to New York, all the large department stores would have Jewish names. And then all of that obviously disappeared. But now there is an attempt, a project to recreate these old Jewish brands from the 20s and the 30s. And I thought that was a very fascinating way of looking at a Jewish life and see what can be resurrected in some shape and form. Are you aware of this particular project, or are there similar ones that you are aware of in Germany?
Well, there are many initiatives going on, and of course it's fantastic. I think also for Jews to take up all these traditions. And it is right. Actually, the area where the Federal Foreign Office is located now was the Jewish tailors and wow. Fashion design center of Germany, actually. And even there, actually, there are shops and designers coming back. There, actually, that's really nice. Also, particularly the immigration from Israeli Jews to Berlin is very impressive, I would say. We have around 15 to 20,000 Israeli Jews in Berlin only, and this is really a fantastic thing that, in spite of the worrying situation we have in the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany and in Berlin particularly, Jews like to come. We still have more Jews coming to Germany than Jews leaving Germany, and I think they are also attracted by the whole creative atmosphere we have, particularly in Berlin, but also in other great cities. And of course, this is a very positive development. And fortunately, the state there doesn't have to do too much. I mean, it's either you create an atmosphere that attracts creative people, or they don't come. I think the state should not interfere too much in that, but of course we observe it with great sympathy.
You just mentioned the rise of anti-Semitism. I prefer to talk about what we just talked about, but of course, I mean, unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not something new, and but I was just reminded and read several articles about those different expressions of anti-Semitism in churches, in some sculptures, some relief. I believe they're called Judensaw. The depictions of Jews as pigs, and I understand there's a little bit of a debate of what to do with those with those expressions of anti-Semitism in churches in Germany and I'm afraid also outside of Germany. What would be your take on this? So should we keep those sculptures to as a testimony of this anti-Semitic past, and to make sure that everyone hears about it, or should we remove them?
Well, there's actually a very controversial debate now, because we have concrete cases now here in Germany, and it's a terrible tradition. Both big churches in Germany have had. And I think my personal opinion is actually that we have to contextualize them, of course, mm-hmm. these depictions, and in some cases, I think it would be best to show them in a museum, to take them, mm-hmm. to remove them from the churches and to put them, in the most extreme cases, in a museum, of course, because, well, it's part of our reality, of our history, and of course we should not hide anything, of course, from our history. But there are also other cases. I mean, every case has to be examined separately, of course. We have a very controversial case now in the city of Kalbe in Saxony-Anhalt, near Halle, where the terrible anti-Semitic terrorist attack occurred last year. And there we have a very interesting case, because the religious community itself, the evangelical church, the community, said they would like to put it, to remove it. And it was actually being removed during a restoration process, and they would like to show it in a separate room in the church. But they would not like to put it up again after the restoration. And terribly enough, you know, the monument authority of preservation of monuments, there's an official authority for that, forced the church community to put back that terrible sculpture, against the will, against the wish of the community. And I think this is not the right way. There should be a discussion about it. Of course, it's part of the history, and it's very important that the church has opened itself, both churches, to discuss that tradition. And I think it's not the right way to force a community to put up that tradition again. And we have to contextualize it, of course, and because the churches are very important partners in the fight against anti-Semitism, and I'm very happy that both churches have really opened up the discussion with bishops and the community, and we have to discuss that in a serious way, also together, of course, with cultural administrations and public with public institutions. But we cannot use force in all that. That's absolutely the wrong way. I will myself be in Kalbe and in Wittenberg, the Church of Martin Luther, where there's also a terrible relief being exposed, and we have to find a new solution. And I'm though very happy that a broader discussion has opened now regarding that. I myself have contributed very much to this, because once again, you can only solve a problem also in society if you discuss it in an open and honest way.
And I think we're very grateful for the ongoing conversation we've had with you over the years, not only in Berlin, but in Brussels, and I'm sure elsewhere in Jerusalem. And something you have said, that where we would agree very much, is that you cannot fight anti-Semitism with being anti-Semitism, or you cannot fight anti-Semitism effectively by tolerance. So we've had this discussion before where we say, well, perhaps it is so, and as you are implying in what you say, that by showing the significant Jewish contributions and by acknowledging, recognizing, and perhaps even going as far as celebrating Jewish life, we create the strongest antidote against Jew hatred. So I'd like, of course, to hear your thoughts on that, but perhaps also combined with anti-Semitism in Europe today, in Germany, excuse me, today. How much do we know about it? How much is domestic? How much is imported? How much is politically? Is there, I'm sure research has been done. I also realize it's very controversial. But what can be said about anti-Semitism in Germany today, but then also what's the most effective way of combating this disease?
Well, if you look at the anti-Semitic crimes, which we register separately from all crimes in the politically motivated statistics of crimes, we have had a terrible rise last year. So we recorded about 2,000 cases in Germany. And 90% of these 2,000 cases come from the extreme right in Germany. So the inherent anti-Semitism that comes from the right. Many of the attacks occur in the internet. It's online crimes regarding the distortion or denial of the Holocaust, but also we have physical crimes too, of course, and that, of course, you can only combat with repressive measures. So you have to punish these people quickly and effectively. So this is the reason why we passed just last week a legislation in Germany to combat anti-Semitism online. So we oblige the internet platforms not only to delete anti-Semitic contents like we did before, but actually to give the IP addresses, the identity of the people who spread that sort of anti-Semitic things to the police, so that prosecution can actually occur. So that's very, very effective, and I hope that we will get down the number of anti-Semitic crimes next year with that legislation. But that's only one part, of course. On the other side, we have to enhance the knowledge of anti-Semitism in police, but also in the judiciary, but also, of course, in education, because the fight against anti-Semitism very often does not take place because it is not recognized, it's not discerned by police. This is the reason why we have developed teaching materials, also including the working definition of anti-Semitism as it was worked out by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And that leads me also to different measures. Of course, prevention is great. So of course, it would be much better not to have any anti-Semitic crimes at all. And the crimes are anyway only the peak of a whole problem that is much, much broader. You have also incidents that are not maybe legally that have not to be punished, but still, I mean, of course, anti-Semitic incidents are a very a reality in Germany. So we have to empower Jews to do something against that, to be strong and to do counter speech, of course. And we have to make it clear to society that anti-Semitism does not only concern the Jewish community, but everybody. It's a threat to democracy. And so prevention is important to make it clear to everybody that we have to be intolerant regarding anti-Semitism. And so we have, of course, several ideas. One is, of course, developing a remembrance culture that shows to people where an extreme form of anti-Semitism can lead to, particularly in Germany. But also we have to increase the knowledge about Israel, about the Middle East conflict, of course, because there are many also incidents regard, of course, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, particularly in schoolyards where we have students from Arab origins who have been raised in countries where hatred towards Jews and Israel is very common. And there we have to develop good tools in our integration policy to make it clear to these communities that it is absolutely not accepted here in Germany to give anti-Semitic talks or to act, and regardless where this anti-Semitism leads to. So Israel-related anti-Semitism is as unacceptable as every other form of anti-Semitism, and this is the strategy I follow anyway. There is no harmless form of anti-Semitism, and we have to fight all forms without giving priority to anyone. It's every form of anti-Semitism has to be fought.
I like the words you used of remembrance culture. And in a way, I think many times when we talk about remembrance, we will only talk about the bad things that happen, remembering the bad things. But I think it goes hand to hand. It goes very well with the idea of the first part that we were discussing about the contributions of the Jewish culture to Germany and to Europe and to our civilizations. This is something we have tried to do. It's just the beginning, I would say, inspired by our discussion actually that we've had with you in Berlin of cultural diplomacy, of the importance of culture in trying to remember what the Jewish culture and the Jewish people have contributed. I don't want to speak too much, too long about this, but I always, when you look at anti-Semitism, I think that the best example, the best definition somehow, I'm not sure, I don't think it's in the IRA definition, but perhaps it should be added, is those verses in the scroll, the book of Esther, where is certainly one of the first depictions of anti-Semitism. And what I personally very much like in this book is that it almost gives the antidote to anti-Semitism by this verse where the king says, "What recognition have we given to Mordechai, the Jew?" And it's from that moment on, that in this very special story, it's from that moment on that everything changes. And that everything is overturned, and this is our hope that by remembering, by giving recognition to the contributions of the Jewish culture to our own civilizations, that it would turn things around. I mean, many things could be said. We always recognize the Greek source of our Western civilization, but we don't talk many times about the quote unquote the Jewish source, and so this is for us an important subject, and clearly listening to you, I see that there are many more things we should do with Germany on this aspect. Perhaps moving on to a different form of anti-Semitism. Being French and Swiss, but being French, I was particularly pleased by the words used by President Macron, recognizing that anti-Zionism was a modern form of anti-Semitism. I think today it's important to point this out. and many things could be said about this. But what is your understanding of this question, especially in Germany?
Well, I also followed the speech of President Macron, and who said, yeah, it's anti-Zionism is the modern form or a very special form of anti-Semitism. And of course, he's very right, because if you think that the goal of Zionism is the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the revival of their life as a nation in the land of their fathers. So of course, Zionism is the foundation of the Jewish state today. And anyone who denies that or who fights that denies the right of Israel to exist. And this is fulfills at least one criterion of the so-called 3D test: delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. So of course, that constitutes a very obvious form of anti-Semitism, and we have that in Germany too. People speak badly about Israel, but they mean Jews, so that they relate to Israel, but actually what their real goal is to have an anti-Semitic opinion, because they think that the so-called Israel-related anti-Semitism is much more accepted in the public discourse than a classical form of anti-Semitism regarding right-wing anti-Semitism. So of course we have to fight that, and regardless where it comes from. We have had, maybe you followed that in Germany, a very controversial discussion about some thesis of an African historian, Achille Mbembe, who is a very important post-colonial scientist, and he has contributed largely and has made very, very good works in that field. But regarding Israel, he really wrote things that deny the right of Israel to exist. He more or less says that that Israel is a colonial project. Mm-hmm. And this is not acceptable, and I publicly spoke out against him, and I myself encountered big criticism too, but I think we have to fight every form of anti-Semitism, whether it regards Israel or anything else, and regardless who says it, even if someone from outside Germany contributes to that. And the reason why we had that controversial here was that Mr. Mbembe was invited to one of the most important cultural festivals in Germany, the Ruhr Triennale, which is heavily subsidized by public funds. And he's also very close to BDS, actually, to the BDS movement. And there's a very clear decision of the German parliament, the Bundestag, and the federal government too, to outlaw, to fight BDS. And this is the reason why I spoke out. And this is also the reason in the end he didn't come because of the Corona crisis, but I think we have to defend ourselves, and once again to limit the tolerance when we discern anti-Semitism.
This brings us back to a very key perspective, I think, on the Jewish people in Israel. My perception is the German case, of course, is very, very, very particular. I'm sure as a German, collectively, individually, when we look at the Jewish people, we look at Israel, we look at it through the prism of what happened, the Holocaust. But is it a valid observation to say that by refocusing, not to belittle, of course, what happened, but to pay more attention to the period between the two wars, we're talking from the 20s and the 30s, and what happened in relation to the Jewish quest for self-determination, such milestones as the peace conference in San Remo, the early Zionist movement. This would actually give a broader understanding on the state of Israel, Because today we sometimes say that the state of Israel was born out of the ashes of the Holocaust, and the symbolic meaning is very clear. But there's also a danger in stating that. So the example you mentioned, I would like to make the counter argument and say that the San Remo conference in particular, and the right for the Jewish people to reconstitute their national home, was the beginning of the decolonization. And African countries were very inspired by this process, because they said, well, if the international community is accepting the right of the indigenous people to self-determination, this will also have ramifications in Africa, which it did. So I'd like to, I said we're going to read text, I'll write just one sentence or two from the life of Albert Einstein. And this is the book written by Walter Isaacson, a very, where Einstein in 1921 said that my relationship to the Jewish people has become my strongest human tie. And he says that next to science, this would become his most important defining connection. And this is something we often neglect when we speak about Israel, and we look, we start with 1945 and the post-war period. Is this a correct assessment from my side, not being German, that because of the historical connection, this is perhaps a period in the history of the last century which hasn't been paid sufficient attention to?
Oh, no, I would certainly agree, of course, and it would be too little to think that, for instance, the state of Israel was given to the Jews in return for the Holocaust or so. Of course, it is. Of course, the Holocaust was a decisive factor, but certainly not the only reason. Zionism has existed much before, and of course, particularly in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, we have had very interesting discussion and developments. We had many centers here in Germany regarding the Haskara movement, where young Jews were trained and were prepared, were taught agricultural techniques in order to prepare themselves for going to Palestine, as it was called then. And it's only now that we have that we're rediscovering these sources. Actually, there are NGOs that would like to draw the attention of the general public in Germany in that of that cultural tradition, because it was very, very widespread in Germany in the Jewish communities, and I think this is something which we should rather focus also maybe within our general program of coming year, 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. This would be a very interesting aspect, because there was a big discussion from Jews and non-Jews regarding these things, and I'm sure that Albert Einstein has also contributed, or at least followed that discussions. And of course, there's this rather tragical quotation. I don't know who did it. He said the pessimists in that time emigrated to the United States and to Jerusalem. The optimistic Jews stayed, and they ended up in Auschwitz.
Yeah, this period in the 1920s, Thomas just mentioned Albert Einstein. I don't want to talk too long about this, but I think it's quite fascinating to see all the different approaches there in the 1920s for their view of Zionism, Albert Einstein's view, and even Gershom Scholem, the already mentioned, his view of saying that Zionism is if I remember correctly, the utopian return of the Jewish people to his history. Many times when I try to make the differentiation between the Jewish culture and the Jewish and the Greek sources, I try to make the difference between Odysseus and Abraham, and saying that Odysseus was trying to go back to his hometown, to always remember, not to forget where he comes from, and to return. And Abraham was almost the opposite. But in a way, I realized that, and that's where it's beautiful, this weaving of cultures, this dialogue between the Jewish and the Greek culture. So the Jewish culture and the culture of the nations, you could say, as Rashi would say, is that according to Sholem, in a way, Zionism is this Odysseus journey, but for the history, to return to one's history on one's land, of the land of the ancestors. It's of course, the thing that I think most people don't realize is that Zionism at the beginning and in the 1920s wasn't just a political endeavor. It was really also very cultural, and there are many texts by Einstein who tried to make this of the future state of Israel. He wanted to make it a university state, in a way. That was, he wanted to make a big university, being seeing how many Jews, especially in the East, had difficulties going to universities, and I understand that he wanted to build some Jewish German universities, and then they ended up putting together the Hebrew University, so it did this whole quest, which is not known enough, I believe, and which gives a different take on Zionism of this quest. Yes.
Ambassador Klein, we will let you, we usually when we do the webinar, we ask a guest to choose a text which is relevant. I will let you read that text in just a minute, but before you do, because I know the text that you will be reading is a German giving a speech in Jerusalem, I will just read 2 sentences. This is also a German giving a speech or speaking in Jerusalem in 1921, and this is Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. So it says that one day he went to a reception for a Zionist organization. The gates of the building were stormed by people who wanted to hear him. I considered this the greatest day of my life, Einstein proclaimed in the excitement of the moment. Before, I have always found something to regret in the Jewish soul, and that is the forgetfulness of its own people. Today, I have been made happy by the sight of the Jewish people learning to recognize themselves and to make themselves recognized as a force in the world. I'll stop there. And just to say that the text by Ambassador Klein will be in German, where in the recorded version we will add subtitles for those whose German is rusty at the moment. Please, Ambassador Klein.
Yeah, well, I will read the text in German, but I will announce it now. What it is? It is the very famous speech our Chancellor Angela Merkel had before the Knesset in 2008, and she was also allowed to give that speech in German. It's something very special, of course. I mean, in the Knesset, to speak German in the Knesset, of course, was a big gesture by the Israeli parliament to give it. And I know from the time there had been discussions about that, but she did that, and I would like to quote 2 important, or the most important parts in German, and it goes as follows. Aus der Erfahrung, dass das Unmögliche möglich werden kann, können wir die Entschlossenheit und die Zuversicht schöpfen, dass sich auch jede Anstrengung lohnt, die den Nahen Osten einen großen Schritt näher zu einem friedlichen Miteinander bringt. Oder, um es mit den bekannten Worten von David Ben-Gurion zu sagen, wer nicht an Wunder glaubt, der ist kein Realist. Wenn wir heute zum 60. Jahrestag der Gründung des Staates Israel auf die deutsch-israelischen Beziehungen schauen, dann wissen wir, sein Satz hat sich als ebenso realistisch wie richtig erwiesen. Ja, es sind besondere, einzigartige Beziehungen mit immerwährender Verantwortung für die Vergangenheit, mit gemeinsamen Werten, mit gegenseitigem Vertrauen, mit großer Solidarität füreinander und mit vereinter Zuversicht. In diesem Geist feiern wir das heutige Jubiläum. In diesem Geist wird Deutschland Israel nie allein lassen, sondern treuer Partner und Freund sein. And at the later stage, he said that very famous sentences: Die Sicherheit Israels ist Teil der deutschen Staatsräson. End of quote.
Sehr gut.
Dankeschön.
Gregory, I think at this stage we are going to wrap up shortly, but we've given our viewers. I meant to say before we started that we should look at this as a continuation of our lunch in Berlin, just with the exception that we have 100 or so people watching us. But it also means that they have been able to send us questions. Gregory, I think you have one, and I have perhaps one.
Yes, as today marks the 75th anniversary of the Charter of the United Nations, and having the UN portfolio in our organization, I can't stop thinking of the UN and knowing that Germany has a non-permanent seat at the Security Council this year, and also will have the presidency next month. I mean, in a few days. We've been working these past years with at the UN with the permanent and non-permanent members of the Security Council, and we believe that the Security Council members, especially non-permanent members, have a distinct role to play, and I just want to, before I ask really my question, I want you to underline the role that Poland has had the past 2 years in the Security Council, since we were discussing with them the importance of raising certain questions in the council, the question of persecution of religious minorities are never dealt in the council, never brought up, and for the first time last year, Poland brought it up, had a special a meeting on this issue, and so knowing that also Germany has the ERA chairmanship for this year, wouldn't it be an important way for Germany to bring this question of anti-Semitism in the Security Council? Because anti-Semitism, there's been only, to my knowledge, I think only 2 informal meetings of the UN General Assembly and very recent, but to me the question of anti-Semitism is a security issue today. What do you think about this idea of bringing the question of the fight against anti-Semitism to the Security Council? Is this something that Germany could work on? I know that next month is very close, but what do you think about this idea?
I think generally, the United Nations have focused too little regarding the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, and you rightly noted that only 2 informal meetings of the General Assembly have happened in that. I participated at both of them. I was one of the initiators about that, together with our friends from the US, Canada, and of course Israel, but also some other European partners. And I think we have to continue in that. I also think that it would be a good idea if the United Nations appointed a commissioner regarding the fight against anti-Semitism. So we need a UN Katharina von Schnurbein. I think that would be very, very helpful because many of the resolutions of the General Assembly are directed against Israel or have an anti-Semitic connotation at least, and there has to be someone who examines that and who works against that in the UN framework. And that's my opinion. We should have an institution actually in the UN framework who is vigilant in that, as I do in the German government. But of course, I mean, then one idea could be also that the Security Council could address the problem of anti-Semitism. Of course, I mean, only next month is too short, but I will keep that. I think it's a very good idea, and I will keep that in the discussion with the colleagues of the permanent representation we have in New York. And I actually think it's important to raise a sensibilization regarding the issues in all organizational frameworks in the UN, and the Security Council is one of them.
I think this is one of the best conclusions we could have. So I would refrain from adding another question because it would take away from this excellent idea. Maybe just also to recall, as you know, Ambassador Klein, our first webinar was a virtual concert with a world-renowned violinist. We also know that you are maybe not a world-renowned, but for us, renowned violinist. And our next idea is to do it hopefully live when the situation would permit in New York. And of course, it will be an honor to have you participate as a reader of text like Katharina von Schnurbein, but perhaps also to team up with Renaud Capuçon with your violin and contribute this way through cultural diplomacy. And this is something we learned from you. So it's been a particular honor to have this conversation with you, and we look forward to follow up discussions, which doesn't necessarily have to be on a recorded webinar, but perhaps over a lunch in Berlin or Helsinki or some other appropriate place. Basel, I think Gregory says. So that is to say, thank you so much, Ambassador Klein. You have for being generous also with your time, and we learned a lot. And I know that many have showed an interest in this webinar. And I know for the Americans viewers, this is a bit problematic. It's very, very early in the morning in most parts of the United States, but I know that many will watch the recorded session. Let us also say that next week we go back to our usual time, Thursday, 4 o'clock Brussels time, when we will have the Israeli ambassador to the European Union, Ronnie Leshnoyar, with us one day after the planned Israeli extension of sovereignty in West Bank. So we don't know what will happen, but we can be sure of is that it will be a very interesting discussion, especially then focusing on Israeli-EU relations. But again, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you, Ambassador Klein, hopefully soon, and we look forward to the next webinar next week on Thursday.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and all the best.
Thank you.